there is a war of ideas that's taking place. The battleground for that war seems to be the internet. The platforms of that battle are social media. Never have we seen this level of confusion in our sense of self, our sense of our place in the world, our direction, our narrative, even of who we are, seems to be disintegrating. Mental health issues are spiraling, of course, as they would under these conditions. Anxiety, depression, and a whole slew of other issues are on the rise. We have lost our sense of place in history. We're acting like a species with amnesia. We've lost our sense of direction, and a lot of this is not caused by social media use. Social media, I think, is a symptom of this loss, of being stuck inside of a story that is getting, it's like a tunnel that's getting smaller and smaller, and we can't seem to find our way out. As that occurs, people are panicking, and they're turning on each other. They're turning even on themselves, it seems. We're cannibalizing in order to try and survive this peculiar crisis that we don't even really have words for at this time.
We have come to a situation where we are no longer sure that we exist. We have a virtual existence. And the more detailed it is, the more we convince ourselves that we're alive, actually. There are too many of us, and we can't stand out anymore. We can't be noticed anymore. We can't be recognized. We can't be acknowledged. It's very difficult to be, so we go to extremes. But I think there's a second strand that we haven't mentioned in Plugged In, and maybe it's a great opportunity to mention it. I think people are documenting their existence. They're kind of trying to prove to themselves that they do exist. Because when you're not seen, or when it's extremely difficult to be acknowledged, recognized, and seen, you feel non-existent, you feel vitiated, you feel annihilated, annulled.
When we fight and become agitated for our sense of self, it can only be because we feel that we're in a background of not existing. If I need to go, I am a white male, I'm a white male. Well, Jesus, dude, relax. Obviously you are. You would only ever fight for that if you felt like in some way you're fading, in some way something is disintegrating.
It's about identity formation. People think that in the early years of life, early childhood, you form an identity, and later on this identity differentiates, becomes kind of fine-tuned. So there are added layers like sexual identity and professional identity and so on. But at some point this process stops, and then they have an identity for life. That's of course untrue. Identity requires, it's a full-time job. You keep honing your identity, redefining it, revisiting it, changing it, metamorphosizing it. I mean, identity is a process, not an event, not a fixture, not a construct. It's a process. If you spend most of your time, or a big chunk of your time, or if you place importance on interacting virtually, online, with avatars, and so on and so forth, you would have a serious problem with ongoing identity maintenance. Your identity would be damaged. Now, why is that? Because the major regulatory mechanism, the major type of interaction that creates identity, maintains identity, sustains identity, and perpetuates identity is interaction with other people. It is the gaze of other people, input from other people, feedback from other people, calibration by other people telling you, you're doing this right, you're doing this wrong. Did you realize that you're like that? I mean, this is crucial to identity maintenance. Now you could say, okay, but I'm getting all this through social media. We are not. The thing is that you're not. Interactions, communication via social media is very superficial. It's very bit-sized. It's soundbite oriented. It's geared toward generating effect, toward impressing rather than communicating. It's improperly calibrated, so it's very extreme. It's not the kind of feedback that helps you to maintain your identity. So gradually what happens is the longer you are on social media at the expense of real life interactions, the more your identity is challenged. And of course, in the absence of identity, you feel annulled. You feel that you're disappearing, or to use your excellent phrase, you feel that you're fading. And and you need to restore, because you can't not exist. You need to restore this somehow. So, and that creates a series of other problems. The attempt to restore being, or restore existence, or at least the sense of being alive. That creates a series of other problems. So, when you are interacting with other people in real life situations, it's a win-win situation. It's a win-win situation because you get and usually you give. Even if you don't say anything, you give. In a real life interaction, in a real life situation, we exchange enormous amounts of information, majority of information actually, via body language, pheromones, other things which are utterly not in our control. So real life interactions are multi-dimensional, multi-sensory. So all the senses are involved, etc., etc. And therefore, these are very balanced situations. These are win-win situations where you get and you give. Not so in social media. Social media is a zero-sum game. You get attention, I don't get attention. You have likes, I don't have these likes. People's eyeballs are on your Instagram. They can't simultaneously be on my Instagram. It's a zero-sum game. So we have trained a whole generation, possibly two, to construct identity at the expense of others. Exclusionary identity.
Exclusionary and somehow intrinsically aggressive identity.
Aggressive by definition, because zero-sum games, zero-sum games, where if you win, I lose, and if I lose, they are the foundation of natural selection. I don't know if it's a manifestation, but it definitely leverages base infantile human needs. They need to be seen, they need to be recognized, they need to feel that you belong, however artificially. They need to construct a fantasy life that shields you from real life. The need to tell yourself stories, or to be told stories. No one else tells you stories, you tell yourself stories. The need to reassure yourself that you're not losing it, you're not losing popularity, you're not losing influence, you're not losing access, etc., etc. These are basic anxieties, basic, Sartre described actually some of them. These are basic anxieties that social media was constructed knowingly and consciously to capitalize on.
So you think that the ongoing contact with other human beings has an intrinsically healing element to it that provides a baseline? So you may become anxious, you may become depressed, but you see your friends and then you're brought back to baseline, and that's now gone. Leaving the person using social media starving all the time.
Yes, well, first of all, so what I believe. There's a gigantic body of studies that demonstrates conclusively that even a short, theoretically meaningless interaction with another human being has a healing effect, a therapeutic effect, reduces anxiety, reduces depression, reduces level of certain hormones. For example, it has massive impact on cortisol. We are, in this sense, machine-like. For example, when a man passes next to a woman, any man, any woman, the woman could be any age. She could be a looker, she could be ugly, she could be 80, she could be 18, she could be... When a man passes a woman, the level of testosterone jumps by 40%. That's been established in studies for zero. So it's the same with cortisol, it's the same with norepinephrine, it's the same with adrenaline. Our inner hormonal environment is actually mostly regulated via human interaction. When I say human interaction, I mean face to face. We know, again, it's been established in study. I don't want to render this an academic session, but we know, for example, that when two people meet, they emit in a variety of ways, pheromones, smells, and so on. They emit 100 items of information. They transmit 100 items of information which are immediately absorbed by the other person. This information includes all the genetic knowledge about the person, everything about the immune system of the other person, and numerous other data. So we constantly communicate when we meet other people, even if we don't say a word, even if via body language, via pheromones, via smells, via sweat, and this is missing in social media. This, I mean, obviously.
So extensive social media usage indirectly could lead to real biological endocrinal problems where your hormones become out of balance or flat.
Well, if not out of balance, then out of usage or out of practice, in effect. So there were studies in 2008 recapped in a very important article, in academic paper in 2012, that have shown, these studies have shown that people who are exposed to social media, or more, to be more precise, people who are exposed to screen-based devices tend to bond with the screen-based device as though it were a human being.
Right.
So they begin to let the device regulate their hormonal levels and so on and so forth. But of course it's very, very misleading and very dangerous, because the cues emanating from social media, for example, are highly exaggerated. They are fallacious. They are virtual. They are. So we are beginning to react to avatars, to representations, to icons, to the way we used to react to human beings.
Yeah.
And this leads to another problem. We are beginning to be out of practice on how to interact with other human beings. Well, simply.
So we lose the skill, we lose the
Yes,
strength
we
of
lose
it.
the skill set. We are much more practice. We have much more practice, and we are much more skilled at how to interact with smartphones and laptops than we are at how to interact with a girl, if we're male, how to interact with our children, how to interact with our spouses. So this leads to a deterioration in interpersonal skills, which also has been documented in studies starting in 2007. And imagine this, most of these studies have been conducted a year or two after Facebook burst on the scene. Facebook started in 2004, became a phenomenon in 2006. Imagine, the situation has already been seriously bad in 2007 and 8. God knows what it is now. Mysteriously, these studies are no longer conducted. So perhaps it has to do with the fact that social media companies and internet giants such as Google and so on have become the biggest contributors to academia, especially in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest donations come from technology companies.
Oh, okay.
So maybe this has something to do with the fact that these studies mysteriously stopped around 2008, 2009, when Google became the biggest donator.
Yes.
And so on. So, but they have stopped. Even then, the picture has been very bad. Even then. A study from 2008 showed that people much prefer and are much better skilled at interacting with devices than with people.
Yeah.
And now, of course, the situation, in my view, is much more egregious and aggravating.
That's where we are now. The story, the narrative, the ongoing process of thought, the use of language, the capacity to think critically is completely disintegrating. And in horror, we observe this structure of reality that we've created around us and our identity, our place in it, disintegrating. How do we respond to that? Well, we're seeing how we respond to that. Panic, frustration, aggression, agitation, people turning on each other. It sounds hyperbolic, it sounds dramatic, but that is literally what we're seeing. We're seeing people turn on each other. And the predominant format which permits people to do that today is online. How long will it be before that spills out from the online world to the real world? I predict not that long. In a certain way, you could argue that social media is the opposite of reality. You could argue that social media at least is the opposite of a way of processing reality. If you have, what's a good way of processing reality? What do we say when the map that we carry internally is like external reality? Some traditions call it Zen. Some traditions would say it's mindfulness. Some people would say, okay, the map is now matching the territory. In psychology, we would call that sanity. It's just called sanity. So if you are, what is mindfulness? It's being in the moment. Does social media allow you to be in the moment? No, it's all about the past. It's all about memory. We have kids now who say they can't remember things properly if they don't have access to their social media. Or it's all about the future. It's all about what you will do. Is it about being here now? No, it's about being in stories. It's about being inside of some alternative narrative that's not about being here now. Is it about being connected with others? No, it's not about being connected with others. It's about taking some cheap, horrible crap simulation of connection with other people and ignoring them in a way that is brutal, in a way that causes them to experience abandonment and shame and humiliation, because I want to sit with you. And I want you to look at me and I want you to hear me. But you don't want to do that. You want to sit with me whilst scanning through your phone and indulging in this fake connection with other people. The campfire metaphor cures a lot of this. You know, no phones, obviously. We sit, we talk to each other. There's a biological element to this. I'm not a biologist, but I understand that we have these things called hormones, and these things called hormones and neurotransmitters, they affect our mood. Something in the social media is causing the production of these hormones and these neurotransmitters to either flatline or dysregulate. That is going to make people very agitated. If we imagine that social media is like smoking, to the extent that when I used to smoke, I was informed that I was killing all the vitamins in my body. You know, if you had a certain amount of vitamins because of the chemicals that are in the cigarette, it actually causes you to lose the micronutrients in your body and vitamins. People are walking around in a high state of social media usage with a very low state of sort of nutrition and vitamin content. So they're prone, with a weak immune system in a psychological sense, in an emotional sense, they're prone to whatever crap is in the environment. Yeah, they'll get depressed. Yes, they'll develop eating disorders. You name the mental health issue, there won't be many that won't be directly impacted by being deeply, deeply immersed in the false reality of social media and not here in the moment. No, everything needs now to be edited and self-edited so that I can portray the perfect version of myself that I can never truly achieve, because social media keeps changing the algorithms and the expectations so that I can never quite fulfill this role. As a human being gathered around a campfire, I just have to show up. Are you breathing? Yes. Are you awake? Yes. That's good enough.
Identity crisis on a collective or individual level may have started prior to social media. Probably started prior to social media, because I think after the 1960s and so on and so forth, with the emergence of the rabid forms of Anglo-Saxon capitalism, many were left behind, etc., etc. Many groups lost, many collectives lost, many. So I think identities have been challenged before social media erupted on the scene. And then I think what happened is that people were looking for instruments or tools to reconstruct their identity, to revisit their identity, to reform their identity, by excluding others, as we have discussed earlier. And they said, well, these are wonderful new instruments, these are wonderful new tools, these social media. Let me use social media to become recognized, to become acknowledged, to become a winner, to be seen, to obtain narcissistic supply. And that's how it started. But what they did not realize is, because of the nature of social media, the exclusion of face-to-face interactions and other things we have discussed, social media exacerbate identity problems. And so what happened is, people whose identities were anyhow challenged, and people who anyhow converged on a dysfunctional strategy of excluding others to restore their own sense of self, their sense of being. These people ended up using a tool which made their identity crisis much deeper and more profound. That's what I'm saying. That's why not only don't we see a resolution of identity problems and identity politics, but we see a massive explosion of these issues. The radicalization in identity politics, for example, among men and women, among blacks and whites, among the immigrants and indigenous people. The radicalization in identity politics in my view, has to do exactly with this. We forgot how to construct identities in an iterative, mutually beneficial process. We are constructing identities that are akin to natural selection, jungle, the law of the jungle. It's a Darwinian process. People have been talking about social Darwinism for about 150 years. And people think that, for example, the period of Nazi Germany or Second World War was the epitome and culmination of social Darwinism, but of course it's not been. Now is the age of social Darwinism. Now we are being winnowed out. Now there's a process of digital eugenics. Digital eugenics, where you can either be a loser or a winner. Strategies that used to belong exclusively to majority groups are now universal.
Yeah.
All strategies that help you distinguish yourself, stand out, be noticed, be acknowledged, be recognized, feel alive, feel in existence, feel that there is a process of being. All these strategies are no longer identifiable with specific groups, specific backgrounds, specific strata, specific socioeconomic, but they have become universalized. So everyone is using actually the same arsenal against everyone.
Right.
It's a war of all against all. In some respects, you could say that it's a kind of an all-pervasive or ubiquitous civil war fought with digital means. So, but strategies such as racism are universal. Strategies such as sexism. So you can have sexism. Sexism used to be directed at women. So men deployed sexism to exclude women from the workforce, or to underpay them, or to not give them access to opportunities, etc. But today, sexism is two ways.
Yeah.
It's so the universalization of these Darwinian strategies is extremely worrying. Extremely worrying because they do not allow us to create coalitions of any kind.
It's almost become a taboo now, creating coalitions between groups. Is it not a taboo, but seen as something that's a very strange thing to do? Like, why would you come to me? Why would you? You're not in my team. This is it. Can I talk to you when you're not in my team?
But the teams are becoming smaller.
Absolutely, yeah.
The teams are shrinking.
Yeah.
The possibility of creating coalition, because there's always been teams in some way. I mean, whites against blacks.
Sure.
But listen, a typical team included 200 million people. I mean, that creates a possibility for cooperation.
Yes.
In terms of game theory, possibility for cooperation, possibility for coalition building, possibility for goal-oriented action, possibility for activism, possibility for research. You need coalitions to further the human race, the human species. But today, teams have shrunk to the point that coalition building is no longer possible.
Yes.
Because the teams are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller.
So you're a white male, but you're not an English white male.
Yeah,
you're an English white male.
Not English or
wrong generation, wrong sexuality, and there is this pathological effort. It looks like an agitated effort to keep drawing new boundaries, keep drawing new divisions in this unconscious. Like a repetition compulsion, new boundary, new division. We were on the same team yesterday, but I'm afraid you have committed a sin, and now you can't be on the team.
If your identity is exclusionary, the operating principle would be excluding.
But in this new world, this brave new world that we're in, no, my opinion. I also have an opinion. My dumb, stupid fucking opinion counts just as much as yours, even though you have a PhD. That is insane. And does not serve anybody. And it's I personally believe that's a fawning response to the crowd, because the likes, it's all about likes and followers. Once we say the game is all about likes and followers, of course you fawn to the demos, to the mob. We need to have checks and balances. And just because the majority wants a thing does not mean that's best for the majority. How do we know that this is true? Well, we have this little thing, this weird little field of study. I think it's called, human fucking history, where the majority were allowed to make choices and things happened that were not very pleasant. And I predict are due to happen again in our lifetimes. I'm not big on politics, but my limited understanding of fascism particularly is it's not a system of governance that's supposed to last a long time. It's an emergency state that's brought in whilst you deal with an enemy. Fascism doesn't exist without an enemy. Fascism is it's an emergency. Sorry, this is going to hurt for a while, guys. 3-4 years, we promise you. That's all we'll do this for. We must band together to deal with the one single enemy, and then we'll move on. You can't expect large packs of humans to live in high states of insecurity and agitation for long before witch hunts break out. I'm interested in the history of witch hunts. They always correlate with plagues. They always correlate with periods of starvation, bad crops. You've had a bad crop, there'll be a witch hunt. You've had plague, there'll be a witch hunt. When things are bad, somebody must be targeted. Somebody must be scapegoated. It's a natural, unfortunately, it's a natural human response in the mob, in the pack. That's why I speak about the mob this way. I'm frightened. I'm frightened of the demons, quote unquote, inside of people's heads, inside their hearts, especially if it becomes a mass problem. Bad things happen. They have happened in Europe in recent history. and could very easily happen again.
So
This probably would be a really good time to ask a very, very obvious question. I don't think we've ever discussed it. It's one of the big questions. Why has there been an explosion in the awareness of narcissistic personality disorder? Is it because narcissism is on the rise, or is it because awareness is on the rise? You must get that question 4 or 5 times a week.
first of all, I think we should reconceive mental illnesses as metaphors. Mental illnesses are metaphors. They reflect the ethos and spirit, the zeitgeist, the ethos and spirit of the age. That's why, for example, homosexuality is no longer a mental illness. That's why Asperger's syndrome is no longer a mental illness. These mental illnesses ebb and flow. They are not like tuberculosis or like cancer. They are not objective clinical entities. They reflect mores, they reflect conventions, they reflect what society is willing to accept or not. They are culture bound, they depend on culture. So they are wonderful, wonderful barometers and wonderful mirrors of our collective face.
So you're saying when the APA votes on which mental illnesses are invoked into existence and which ones are banished out of existence, we should pay attention?
Absolutely, there's a massive school of thought, scholarship that says that psychology is a form of literature. And exactly as Dostoevsky reflected, 19th century Russia, current day psychology, or psychology in general, reflects society. Definitely, if you read the writings of Sigmund Freud, he reflects middle-class, sexually repressed Vienna. Most of his work is utterly inapplicable to, shall we say, modern Paris, So, yes, psychology, and especially clinical psychology, especially mental health illnesses, are metaphors of our time. They reflect the zeitgeist. So it's not an accident that awareness has risen.
Okay.
Why has awareness risen? When everyone engages in exclusionary identity politics, identity formation, there are always losers and always winners. Remember, it's a zero-sum game. You can't engage in exclusionary politics without someone losing. You can engage in cooperative games. I'm using game theory metaphors. You can engage in cooperative games where everyone wins. But the minute you introduce zero-sum games, someone loses. There were losers in the game of narcissism. And these are what we call today victims or survivors of narcissistic abuse, etc., etc. But it may not be politically correct to say, but anyhow, I'm hated, so who cares? I think most of these losers are actually collapsed narcissists. The term failed narcissist is wrong. Failed narcissist is a phase in the development of borderline personality disorder. The person tries to become a narcissist, fails, she becomes borderline. So this is a wrong term. The correct term is collapsed narcissist. It's a narcissist that fails to achieve goals, such as obtaining narcissistic supply, cultivating and grooming supply sources, etc., regulating emotions via supply, etc., etc. So I think what happened is, with the emergence of narcissism as, by the way, a main tool for identity, exclusionary identity formation. That's why I think narcissism is the future of humanity. Is a main tool. As narcissism emerged as the main way to form your identity, by being seen, by being recognized, by being acknowledged, by being admired, by being adulated, by getting likes, as narcissism emerged that way, there were winners and losers. Everyone wanted to be a narcissist. Everyone wanted to be a narcissist. But some people are much better qualified, much better geared, much better constructed to be narcissists. And they became the classic narcissist. And others collapsed, others failed. And so they feel victimized. They feel they have lost the war. What does it mean, having lost this game of narcissism? Their identity has been challenged. They no longer had a coherent identity. They latched on the first possible identity, victim.
And it's got nothing to do with the particular coordinates of that identity. It's just the first rock that they could pick up to throw.
Yeah, like, okay, I failed as a narcissist. What can I be? What can I be? I must have an identity. I mean, it's frightening. It's dreadful. It's dread. What is called in existentialist philosophy, dread. So it's dreadful. I must have an identity. I mean, I try to be a narcissist. I fail. What can I be? So what can I be is victim.
I'm the victim of a narcissist.
I'm a victim of a narcissist. The world now is divided to narcissists and victims of narcissists, essentially. Even classic conflicts such as black and white if you read the literature, it's narcissism and victims of narcissistic abuse. I mean, utterly. So, victimhood has become the second best identity possible. Like we have a rung of a ladder of identities. You can't be a narcissist. You can be a victim of narcissism. And in this sense, this ameliorated the identity crisis because these people still ended up with some identity. This is why they defend their victimhood so ferociously. Not only because of entitlement and this, but because it endows them with identity, with meaning. The gaze of others is crucial to our sense of existence. It sets boundaries. It affirms the self. It provides feedback. It calibrates. These are the info coming from other people on a regular basis is utterly crucial to maintaining one's sense of identity. Indeed, people in deprivation, there's a whole branch of experimental psychology called deprivation studies, where they put people in tanks with water. I think I'm going to switch to that.
As a therapeutic method.
I mean, just thinking about it gives me an orgasm. So, in deprivation psychology, we deprive people, usually of sensory input, but always of social interaction. Whatever the deprivation experiment is, there's always no social interaction. Some experiments deprive you of the sight of the sense of sight or olfactory sense, but all of them involve a lack of social interaction. These people go insane. They become psychotic. I mean, temporarily psychotic. After 8 days, after 7 days. And they don't go psychotic because of the sensory deprivation. They go psychotic because they are totally disoriented. They don't have feedback from the human environment. So they are disoriented. Of course, when you're in a tank, in a deprivation tank, immersed in water, you would have temporal disorientation. Is it day? Is it night? And so on. But that's not what drives people psychotic. What drives them psychotic is the inability to talk to people. We have two types of water immersion deprivation tests, where we put people in a tank, immerse them in a tank of water, but they have a communication channel. They can talk. And there was another set of experiments where they put in water for, I think, 7 or 8 days with no possibility to communicate. I mean, nothing. No interface. These people emerged utterly psychotic. Discombobulated, disintegrated. So clearly it has to do with the communication. The other guys, is it day, is it night? Nothing serious. So deprivation experiments prove to us conclusively that lack of human, and of course, it's well known in penology. Penology is the science of prison, how to manage prisons and so on and so forth. It's well known. Solitary confinement is considered
the ultimate torture,
the ultimate punishment. And has been ruled repeatedly by courts all over the world to constitute an inhuman type of punishment or cruel and unusual punishment, as the Supreme Court has ruled I don't know how many times. Solitary confinement in most prisons should never exceed 40 days. And usually it's about a week. Why? You could ask why. I mean, the guy has a room all to himself, as opposed to being stuck with 40 other sweaty males.
He's one of the toughest guys in the world. He's a serial killer. He's a
fighter.
He's hard.
He doesn't have to share his cell with anyone. He has everything he needs. He should he should ask for solitary confinement. Everyone breaks to pieces. The strongest people emerge in a primitive state of animalism, because solitary confinement. I mean, you have food, you have shelter. Sometimes you have televisions, but what you don't have is human contact. The wardens are not allowed to talk to you even. I mean, they slide the food, nothing. We know that there's an enormous body of research that proves that human contact is crucial to, and this is what social media has taken away from us. Because it's not that social media came to you and said, listen, it's either you choose me or you choose real life interactions. It's just that it was constructed in a way that conditioned you to such an extent that you had no time or inclination left for real life interactions, because social media gives you the parts of real life interaction which are addictive, which are repetitive, which are conditional, without the costs. of human interaction.
But only a simulated shitty version of it. It's
Yes.
like being fed really cheap heroin. You go, oh,
Yes, exactly.
I need
Cheaper.
feedback, but it's not proper feedback, but I can just pull it out of my pocket and get it in exactly the way that I want.
Social networks need to become more discriminating on a variety of levels, dimensions. They need to become more self-limiting. They need to transition to another business model. These are the three kind of branches of reform. The first thing I think social networks need to introduce usage meters. This kind of feedback can alert users to the fact that they are wasting their time, as Abby said, or that their behavior, the consumption pattern is escalating. Yesterday there were 3 hours, now it's 4 hours. Usage meters in other settings have had an inhibitory effect. When people were confronted with usage meters, they regulated their behavior to reduce consumption or to reduce usage. So this would be the first very important step. The next step is social media should use clocks. Clocks that block access after a certain period of time. So if you've used this platform for 2 hours, you can use it no longer today. You get another 2 hours tomorrow. Rationing, a form of rationing. And it's important to emphasize that the industry is extremely unlikely to introduce any of these measures of its own accord. Self-regulation has never worked in industries that are constructed on addictive or conditioning principles. Because all industries, especially industries constructed on the foundation of addiction and conditioning, have failed at self-regulating. The only exception is internet and social media. That's the Wild West. That's because it resonates, it strikes people as a reification of free speech. Internet and social media, that's free speech, that's the First Amendment, it's untouchable. It's like more or less like gun rights. But it's not true, of course, because regulation should have nothing to do with very little to do with content, with the exception of hate speech and so on. We're not talking about content, we're talking about usage. We're talking about psychological effects of usage, nothing to do with content. So the industry is misrepresenting any attempt at regulation as an attempt to undermine free speech and to abrogate the rights imparted by the First Amendment in the United States, for example. It's utterly untrue. And this is not the only misrepresentation the industry engages in. The next thing, I would get rid of relative positioning. Relative positioning in the case of Facebook and Instagram, so these are the likes. The likes position you relative to other people, but even more importantly, they position you relative to yourself. The likes and other mechanisms of relative positioning, for instance, number of comments and so on, these create competition between you and yourself. They create what we call in psychology dissonance. They create inner conflicts. So we need to get rid of this, all relative positioning. There's no real need to know how many people like your post. Why would you need to know that? If there's something to say to you, they should post a comment. What is the meaning and the aim of likes? Their only conceivable purpose is to create stickiness, to force the user via base conditioning, base in both senses of the word, force the user to come back, to return again and again and again, and to witness the growth in likes capital, in relative positioning capital. That's the only aim. There must be a real-life correlate to get rid of the elements of virtuality, elements of fakeness, elements of, I would say, alternative universe. We must get rid of these elements because they are at the core of separating the user from the real world, firewalling the user from real-life interactions, and so on and so forth. If we get rid of the virtuality, then social media will have become an extension of real social life, which is not a bad thing at all. They would become kind of glorified calendar where you coordinate meetings and talk a bit and so on and so forth. Next thing, I would introduce mandatory storytelling. In other words, even if you make a post or a series of posts which could be deemed meaningless, for example, I'm drinking coffee or I'm baking an omelette, the algorithm can be constructed in such a way that the post and all subsequent actions connected to the post, for example, comments or whatever, can be converted into a story, a narrative. Now, there are already budding experiments like that. For example, Facebook has stories. They recap a year's experience, they convert it into a narrative, and they produce lovely short videos of, I think, about a minute and a half or two, where you go through a life on Facebook. So, and most of these posts are utterly disconnected. Like one of them is with your mother and another one with your wife. I mean, that would be the horror video. But most of them are disconnected, and yet they put them together, and when they put them together, just the fact that they have become adjacent tends to generate the narrative. The narrative is self-generated. It's generated in the user's mind, not in the platform. So I would retool the algorithm to be story-oriented. There are stories in Instagram, stories on Facebook, and there are stories being introduced to Snapchat. Social media caught up to the fact that narratives and stories can actually be as sticky as likes and so on. So I would like to see likes replaced by narratives and stories. It's very healthy. Storytelling is therapeutic. All treatment modalities, all therapies are built on foundations of storytelling. What we do when a patient comes to therapy is we take away one narrative, which is counterproductive, dysfunctional, hampering, inhibitory, and so on. Take away one narrative, and we replace it with another narrative. The main function of a psychotherapist is to construct a plausible alternative narrative that would heal the patient. Every medium is regulated. There is no medium that is not regulated. Television, everything is regulated, except social media. Even big parts of the internet are regulated, by the way, indirectly, but they're regulated, except social media. And social media is utterly obtuse. I mean, like, that's it, that's the model, that's what we do, that's why we can't do anything else, nothing can be done, we're not going to introduce anything, we're going to change anything. Why? I think it's because it's run by teenagers. These are people who have no experience in real life, not even as businessmen. Now, this sounds like an utterly idiotic statement. Zuckerberg is one of the richest people on earth. How can I say that Zuckerberg has no experience in business? I can say that because when Facebook became the behemoth, the juggernaut that he did, Zuckerberg was 21. He was a student in a dormitory. He had no experience in business. These are serendipitous, accidental creations, all of them. None of them was conceived in advance. None of the social platforms are the result of outstanding genius. None of them were pre-planned. None of them were, these are not projects. These are accidents. These are accidents. And at the helm of these accidents were people between the ages of 16 and 21. And they remain stuck in this developmental phase. They're stuck because they've made billions of dollars not by their own fault. I mean, not owing to any gift they have, or any insight, or any genius. Nothing to do with them. They were just happened to be there. So, because they made these billions, accidentally, you don't argue with success. That's it. He knows best. He knows better. And because they lack the depth of what is business, how to conduct, what is socially responsible business, what are the real relationships between business and community, a background of history of other media. They lack all this. They have a million consultants. But consultants don't decide. Zuckerberg decides. Because they lack all this, they have a kind of freeze response. This has been working until now, and I really, between me and myself, know that I had nothing to do with it. So I'm terrified to change the model because I don't really know what I'm doing. You have two models. You can condition people so that they keep coming back to the screen because you have to sell their attention to advertisers. That's one model. But there's another model. You can charge people a fee. When television transitioned to a fee-based service, it was 40 years after it had been invented. There were executives with 40 years experience in producing sitcoms, educational programs, knowing what works, what doesn't work. So they were not, they had no angst, they had no anxiety. When the Federal Communication Commission said, listen, why don't you transition to a fee-based system? They said, actually, it's a great idea. Let's do it. So, but if you take a kid, because never mind Zuckerberg's chronological age, when he succeeded, he was a teenager. That's where he is stuck. I know, it's a psychologist, now forget, a psychologist. When you succeed in something or fail in something, there is something called fixation. Not some Vaknin, Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud said, when you fail or succeed, you get fixated. So he's fixated there. And because he succeeded so soon, so massively, the fixation is total. Like he says, I made so much money, what do you have to tell me? I made 10 billion. I make in 1 hour what you make your entire professional life, and you will give me advice? And then you come to him and say, listen, why don't you change the engine? He says, fuck, anything about the engine? Well, I don't want to touch this. It's working. I'm making $10 billion a year. What, are you crazy? I'm not going to touch this. And he would be combative. He would be like, he's fighting for his life. He perceives it as he's fighting for his life. Never mind that the history of all media, print, electronic, shows that if you transition to a fee system, you make more money. All. It cannot be the single exception. Cannot be. New York Times, cable TV, Encyclopedia Britannica, anywhere you go, any type of medium, they all make much more money with fee. This is the first medium invented by people who are communication averse. Newspapers were invented by people who wanted to communicate, journalists. Television was invented by people who wanted to communicate and was immediately put in use. Everything was all media were invented in order to communicate. Even internet. Internet was invented in DARPA to communicate among universities. All media in the world were all, Gutenberg Bible, all media were invented to communicate, to say something to someone. The only pieces of media which were invented by people who hate to communicate, absolutely abhor real communication and real life interactions, were social media. These are coders, they're loners, they are schizoid, they're hermits, they are teenagers, dysfunctional teenagers with no peer groups, no friends, This was speculation. This is a profile. There's a book about all the... This is a profile. So these people hate real life interactions. They hate to meet people. They hate to go to... They never have a pint in a pub. And they invented this. It's the first medium that is anti-medium against communication. We can't ignore this. We can't ignore this because whatever you say about what has changed with these people is their age and their wealth, but not their psychology.
And I think Ricky Gervais summed this up very well when he said, if people just want to be famous for the sake of being famous, what should you do? Kill someone. If you just want to be known, there you go. It's the fastest way of getting it done. Kill someone. Now you're famous. Now you're known in a way that is very, very quick. It's a very low-calorie way of getting the job done. You will be known if you do that. And what he meant with this ironic comment is, why are we looking for a fame that is pornographic? Not in the sense of sexual pornography, but in the sense of just being there gratuitously for its own sake. How can we not say that that's pure narcissism? What's the point? There is no point. The point is there's no point. What are you famous for? For being famous. Wait a second. You're sending me into regression here. You're famous for being famous for being famous. Is that not what we have? You know, our major celebrities who are spoken about the most online and in mainstream media, most of them are famous for being famous. They're not, it's no longer about their music, it's not about their art, it's not about the films they make, the stories they tell. They have that opportunity, and they choose to just piss it away frivolously on spectacle. It's all moved towards spectacle and nothing else. So microfame probably embodies a purely narcissistic drive to be seen for no good fucking reason whatsoever, on the basis not of offering value, but of offering a fresh spectacle. And you can see that progress. You can see in the definitely since 2010 how all forms of fame have given up any sense of trying to offer value and just going for cheap, fake, just reaction-seeking communication. This is one of the things that bothers me with social media. You could argue it's a cluster B personality disorder producing machine, because it's all about reaction. It's all about mastering reaction-seeking communication. So we said before, it encourages aggression. Really, to be more nuanced with that point, what we mean is like a brutal, loutish, rough way of communicating with people. Why? Because you're appealing to the demos, the masses, the mob. Well, you want your likes. What are you going to do? Appeal to the academics and the intellectuals? They're not on social media. They're reading books, and those who are using it very, very moderately. No, you must appeal to the mass. The mass is the mob. That's the demos. What do they want? Sex, violence, swearing, a reaffirmation that the way they are in their own thuggish, loutish way in life is the right way to be. Okay, so we all agree now. This is the game we're going to play. What do we end up with? The Kardashians. Famous for what? Women walking around with plastic arses. They literally spend, it's a multi-million-dollar industry. Just have your arse filled with plastic so it's big. 50 years ago, 20 years ago, my poor grandparents who fought through World War II so that we would have the right for men to pluck their eyebrows and get lip implants and women can get arse implants. What for? This is pure narcissistic pornography. And again, I don't mean sexual pornography, I mean it's gratuitous. It's just there for its own sake. And we're being trained, conditioned, rewarded for reaction-seeking behavior. The more outrageous you are, the more likes and the followers you get. And I can't even sit here and claim that it's futile, that microfame is futile, because it isn't. Because you can get financial reward for it. You can get your $100,000, $1 million deal. You know, if you have enough likes and followers and you say, hey guys, buy these trainers, there's a company out there who'll give you lots of money for it. So this is where obviously at first the real world bled into the online world, and we go, oh, that's strange, isn't it? You know, now it's online, it's in that other world. We're way past that now. The online world has its own gravity. It's this own fake planet that's been created, and now the horror of the unconscious, the monsters are coming out of Pandora's box back into this world. So the online world is now affecting the real world, and we have these strange, invasive moments where the darkness of the unconscious of the online world spews back out and vomits out demonic behavior and words and attitudes back out onto us. And this is something that, you know, I think could have been prevented if somebody had just said, hey guys, we need to be responsible adults about this. Let's put some checks and balances in here. Let's stop this. Let's not make it so that children as young as 10 can be influenced by the kind of indoctrination that would make 8, 9, 10-year-old girls develop anorexia and bulimia at levels that have never been seen before in recorded medical history. How do you make a 10-year-old anorexic? Why are these kids like this? Why are they acting as though they're in an abusive relationship? Because they are. This is an abusive relationship, which is why I'm a hardliner. I'm not of the mindset of, oh, well, you know, do this, you know. I really just think it's too late for that now. We need a hard reset. Maybe after a hard reset, we could go back and go, okay, guys, we already experienced how it went wrong before. We want you to be able to build communities. That's a beautiful thing. I'm not saying it's all destructive. I'm saying that it's 85 to 90% destructive. And the impact it's having on kids, the impact it's having on us as adults and society at large is massively corrupting and destructive. And it needs to be stopped. now. Another year or two of indoctrination, brainwashing, conditioning, we can't afford it. We've got to do something now.